ever be. This idea may sound startling, even unbelievable, yet traces of it linger in ancient scriptures, mystical traditions, and half-erased whispers that point to a forgotten truth. The mystery before Genesis is not simply about creation, but about transformation. How the first human went from light to matter, from eternal brilliance to the fragile body of flesh. The Bible, as we know it, begins with Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Yet what if there was a story that came before, a hidden prologue, one that speaks of Adam not as a clay-bound man, but as a shining being clothed in glory? The earliest traditions in both Jewish and Christian thought hint at Adam wearing garments of light. The Hebrew word or for light is often contrasted with or for skin, suggesting that what Adam once had was taken from him when he fell, replaced with mortal covering. This single shift in language has fueled centuries of speculation. Adam's original state may not have been of dust and decay, but of brilliance and purity. To many, this feels more than symbolic. It resonates with something deep in the human spirit. Because isn't that our struggle today, to remember who we truly are beneath the layers of flesh, sin, and worldly distraction? We live in a world filled with confusion about identity and purpose. People feel empty, broken, searching for meaning. In success, in relationships, in fleeting pleasures, only to find themselves more lost than before. Could it be that this longing is a faint memory of our first state, when humanity was clothed in light and lived in direct communion with the Creator? The forgotten story of Adam is not only about the past, it is about us. It reveals the root of our restlessness and the reason we struggle with identity. For if Adam's first body was a radiant one, then we too carry within us a spark of that light. Something within us remembers, even if history has tried to erase it. Ancient writings outside the canon of the Western Bible hold fascinating echoes of this truth. The Book of Enoch, long preserved in Ethiopia, describes heavenly beings, clothed in dazzling radiance. Some traditions suggest that Adam too shared in this same light before his fall. The Kabbalistic texts of Jewish mysticism also speak of Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, as a luminous being whose essence extended beyond physical limits. Even in early Christian thought, there were debates about the glorious body humanity once held and the one promised to be restored in the resurrection. These aren't just theological curiosities. They are fragments of a larger story, scattered across cultures and centuries, waiting to be pieced together. Why then is this part of the story so hidden? Why do most believers only hear of Adam being shaped from clay and animated with breath? Perhaps because the story of Adam's light body challenges the narratives of control. A human clothed in divine brilliance is not a creature bound by limitation, but one who reflects God's own glory. To teach such a truth would remind people that they carry the image of the divine in more than just flesh, that they are capable of transformation, of awakening, of reclaiming the light. Such an idea is dangerous to systems that profit from spiritual ignorance. But silence does not erase memory. The fragments remain. Even in Christian liturgy, the idea lingers that Christ came to restore what was lost in Adam. If Adam lost a body of light, then Christ came not only to save the soul, but to reclothe humanity in its first glory. This frames salvation not as escape from earth, but as restoration of what we once were. The lost story before Genesis, therefore, is the missing piece that makes sense of humanity's hunger, our spiritual emptiness, and our hope for redemption. Imagine Adam standing in the garden, not with fragile skin, but clothed in radiance. His body was not weighed down by pain or decay. His mind was not clouded by confusion or fear. He walked in the presence of God, unhindered, shining with a glory we can scarcely imagine. That was humanity's beginning, not frailty, but brilliance. And when Adam fell, that light dimmed, replaced by the fragile covering of skin. This is why shame entered, why hiding began, why death became our destiny. And yet, deep within every human heart, there remains a memory of light. Every time we look for meaning beyond the material, every time we feel that life should be more than what it seems, we are echoing that ancient truth. The modern search for identity, whether in culture, career, or relationships, is at its core. A search for the lost light of Adam. We sense it, but we can't fully grasp it. And this is what drives people into despair or into faith, the yearning to return to what we once were. This is why the forgotten story before Genesis matters today. It is not about curiosity or hidden lore for its own sake. It is about a truth that could reshape how we see ourselves. If we were once clothed in light, then we are more than our brokenness, more than our failures, more than the limitations others place upon us. We are, at our core, beings destined to shine again. The Bible hints at this when it says the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The forgotten mystery of Adam's first body of light is not only a past reality, it is a future promise. But here is the challenge. To recover that light, we must look beyond the stories we have been told and explore the ones that were left out. We must be willing to ask uncomfortable questions, to dig into texts that tradition tried to silence, and to open our hearts to a truth that both humbles and empowers us. Because the forgotten mystery before Genesis is not about Adam alone. It is about every one of us, and the journey to reclaim the light we have lost. So as we open this exploration together, ask yourself, could it be true that Adam was once a being of pure light before he became flesh? And if so, what does that mean for your life, your struggles, your destiny? Before we continue deeper into this mystery, I want to invite you to be part of this journey with me. Subscribe to this channel, Bible Says, and help us reach 10,000 subscribers so that more people can uncover these forgotten truths. Share this video with friends and family who are searching for meaning. If you want to support this work in a deeper way, you can use the Super Thanks option below to give financially. It helps us keep producing content like this. Drop your name and the city you're watching from in the comments so we can see the global family that's coming together around these truths. And don't forget to check the description for links to the complete Bible with 88 books and the Book of Enoch. Two powerful sources that will help you see what tradition has long tried to hide. The journey has only begun. The mystery before Genesis is waiting to be uncovered. There are hints of a more profound tale, a forgotten dawn that lingers beyond the boundaries of memory, even before the words, "in the beginning," were ever written in Genesis. For centuries, mystics, theologians, and seekers have been troubled by the notion that creation did not occur all at once with Adam and Eve, but rather developed in phases, some of which were concealed and others of which were erased. If the world is already in motion at the start of Genesis, what happened before that first day? Was there an unwritten prelude, a time when existence was shaped by divine light rather than dust? In addition to being a matter of theological interest, this question opens a window into a vision of humanity's primordial state, in which Adam was a radiant being reflecting divine brilliance prior to his descent into flesh, rather than just a man made of clay. One of the best windows into this lost era is provided by Kabbalistic teachings. According to Jewish mysticism, Adam Kadmon was the primordial man who existed before the earthly Adam was formed. Adam Kadmon was not human in any sense that we can comprehend. He existed in eternity rather than history and was composed of light, an emanation of the infinite. According to this vision, Adam Kadmon served as the cosmic template that allowed divine energy to enter the lower worlds and serve as the blueprint for all creation. His existence demonstrates that the human story is about a long-standing relationship between heaven and humanity, rather than just earth and dust. According to Adam Kadmon, a luminous form of man, an eternal image, was already there before Genesis, before rivers flowed and stars burned, and it was just waiting to be revealed. Ethiopian spiritual traditions have a surprising resonance with this idea. The origin of humanity is frequently explained in Ethiopian Orthodox and mystical writings as being much more complex than simple dust formation. According to some writings, before man's essence was enmeshed in physical flesh, it was spiritual, a reflection of God. With its preserved apocrypha and wider canon, the Ethiopian Bible alludes to tales that the Western Bible decided not to include. References to a pre-material reality, where beings of light moved in unison with the Creator, can be found in those hidden narratives. Ethiopia has preserved remnants of this deeper memory, remnants that hint at a world before days were used to mark time, thanks to its ancient faith, which has roots in both Judaism and Christianity. This idea of a pre-Genesis dawn is echoed in other apocryphal works, which are books that have long been excluded from the Western canon. According to some traditions, the angels themselves saw how man was formed, not out of clay, but out of divine thought. Long before Adam's earthly body ever set foot in the garden, the Book of Enoch, which is highly regarded in Ethiopia, describes heavenly realms and orders of beings. The descriptions of radiant ones in some passages, messengers of light who carried wisdom and knowledge, indicate a multi-layered creation that is far more enigmatic than the Genesis narrative implies. In these works, creation is not presented as a straightforward occurrence, but rather as a cosmic drama that develops in phases, each of which reveals more profound secrets about how light turns into matter and how eternity turns into history. There are serious issues with the notion of a luminous world prior to material creation. Human destiny is bound to glory rather than dust. If Adam was originally thought to be light, this would imply that the fall from Eden was a descent from a higher, more radiant existence into the limitations of flesh rather than merely disobedience. This descent is characterized by many mystics as both a tragedy and a gift. Tragic because man became frail and prone to death after losing his luminous form. Gift, as humanity discovers how to rediscover its original light and reawaken to the divine spark within through the earthly journey. Since then, spiritual conflict has revolved around this tension between spirit and dust, light and flesh. Hints of this unwritten dawn are also preserved in ancient cultures outside of the Bible. According to Egyptian spirituality, the divine entity Atum forms the world after emerging in a radiant form from the waters of chaos. According to Mesopotamian tradition, order was established after primordial beings of chaos and light engaged in a wrestling match. Despite the differences between these traditions, they all convey the same underlying message. Light, not earth, was the first element to create. From the start, humanity was envisioned as essential to the original luminous order, not as a postponed afterthought. It has always been more than abstract theology to believe that man was formed by divine light before matter. It appeals directly to the human heart's desire for many. What causes people to experience a profound sense of loss and incompleteness? Why do we look outside of the material world for meaning? Maybe it's because humanity has a deep-seated memory of that initial state, the radiant self before flesh. This may help to explain why mystics throughout history have characterized spiritual awakening as recalling a forgotten memory rather than learning something new. Recalling who we were before the dust obscured our light is what it means to awaken. Oddly, even science, despite speaking a different language, can relate to this concept. Radiant energy pervaded the universe prior to the formation of stars and the cooling of planets. Before matter gathered into galaxies, there was light. The universe, according to physicists, started out brilliantly before forming. Even though science doesn't mention Adam Kadmon or supernatural entities, it follows the same sequence. Light comes first, followed by matter, and finally life. Could it be that the same truth, that existence itself started in radiance before descending into the weight of substance, was being described by ancient mystics in their own language? Therefore, the unsolved mystery before Genesis is not just a theological curiosity, but also a crucial component in comprehending our identity. If man was originally light, then his purpose on earth is to awaken the light within his body rather than to deny it. Every hardship and desire for transcendence turns into a step towards recalling the bright dawn that came before the story was written. There was a world before the world, a creation before Genesis, and within it the human story already glowed in divine brilliance, according to the Apocrypha, mystics, Ethiopian tradition, and even scientific whispers. This is the unwritten dawn, when Adam was more than flesh, when beings of light existed before material form, and when the very fabric of divine radiance was woven into the destiny of humanity. Rediscovering this dawn means seeing ourselves from a different perspective and realizing that the light that shaped the universe itself, not the dust, was where we truly came from. The greatest mystery facing humanity is not where we started in Genesis, but rather who we were before the words beginning were ever spoken. There is a little-known tale from the quiet before the world was formed that describes Adam's initial appearance as a radiant form made entirely of divine light, rather than as a creature of earth, dust, or clay. According to this story, the first human was a shimmering representation of divine brilliance, not heavy with soil. His body was composed of the same luminous essence that once flowed from the eternal source itself, and he pulsed like the rising sun. Adam's portrayal as a light body is a vision of majesty, one that places humanity as a crown placed upon creation before the material even existed, rather than as a creature confined in weakness from the start. In the vastness of a universe that was not yet the world we know, this light-born Adam stood. Waves of his presence rippled outward, touching the boundaries of the heavenly realms like ripples in water. It was said that his breath itself glowed, a golden fire filling the air, warming the invisible. According to old legends, when he opened his eyes for the first time, whole choirs of angels stopped praising the eternal because they were so amazed by the brightness that now glowed among them. Their light was not like his, because Adam's genius revealed something deeper, a mystery of the divine essence itself made manifest in a form that mirrored the unknown, while the angels were created beings, limited in their purpose and hierarchy. With their wings folded in awe and discomfort, the angels gathered to watch him. Some gazed upon him in wonder, wondering how such splendor could be bestowed upon a being that possessed both spirit and the promise of flesh in the future. Others experienced jealousy because they saw a reflection of the eternal in Adam's light that was even more magnificent than they were. According to the legends, the heavenly host, which had joined together in song at the beginning of creation, was now split in reaction to the bright man of light. Jealousy stoked the hearts of those who bowed and those who did not. According to the ancient texts, this division among the angels was a cosmic turning point rather than just a matter of pride. They were reminded of their own limitations by Adam's brilliance. In contrast to them, he was made to bear the light into worlds they were unable to access in addition to living in it. He would unite the eternal and the temporal, the visible and the invisible. The celestial order was upset because of this potential, which made him superior to the angels. Because Adam's body of light was destined to descend, to clothe itself in material form, and to walk the earth, it was not meant to stay unaltered forever. Knowing this secret, the angels struggled with mixed feelings. The story of Adam's light body is portrayed as a revelation of the divine's favor towards humanity in Ethiopian mysticism. According to the traditions, his body is like fire, wrapped in crystal. It is translucent but unyielding, with every part of him glimmering with colors that mortal eyes cannot see. In those early days, he was so brilliant that the sun and moon drew their light from him. He was enormous, towering like a pillar between heaven and the earth below, and he was crowned with a luminous halo that was inherent rather than bestowed. Before the clay touched him, this was Adam in his original form, the bearer of light and the mirror of the Eternal's image. The angel's admiration for his majesty swiftly evolved into a loyalty test. Praising the mystery of the Creator, who had created a being greater than they had ever dreamed possible, some sang hymns in his honor. Others murmured among themselves, wondering why someone who was bound to succumb to material weakness should be bestowed with such splendor. Because it is said that some angels refused to bow to Adam's light body when the Eternal ordered them to, this envy sowed the seeds of rebellion. They disobeyed the divine plan that put humanity at the center of creation's purpose, not Adam. The idea of a first template, a divine emanation that shaped the worlds, is embodied in Kabbalistic thought through Adam Kadmon, the primordial man of light. This figure, whose every limb radiates pathways of light, the channels through which creation itself unfolds, is not yet the Adam of Eden, but rather the Adam of eternity. The traditions that characterize Adam's first breath as a breath of illumination are strongly echoed by this image. For Adam, breathing meant radiating energy, pulsing the very force of life outward rather than inhaling air. The sweetness of his breath, which hung like incense around the Most High's throne, filled the heavens. With a scent of purity, Adam's form was magnificent in more ways than one, for within its radiance lay knowledge and wisdom. When he spoke, his voice rolled like thunder but was calming like music, and his eyes gleamed like twin suns, reflecting cosmic mysteries. He was more than just alive. He was life itself, a container brimming with divine vitality. As the angels looked upon him, they saw reflections of unformed possibilities and realms in his light. Some shuddered in awe, while others shrank, unable to believe that a creature that so fully embodied the image of the Eternal could be given such power. When the angels saw that Adam's brilliance was permanent rather than fleeting, their jealousy grew. Adam's light body was free, in contrast to the celestial lights that were fixed in the heavens. Wherever it went, it could expand, move, and illuminate. His brightness was not a location, rather it was alive and embodied in him as a quality that was inextricably linked to him. This freedom, this special connection between Adam and the Eternal that made him shine like a lamp lit directly by the hand of God, was envied by the angels, who were confined to their stations. According to some traditions, Adam's light body held the seeds of all humanity. His brilliance was not unique to him. Rather, it was a gift meant to be given, and a legacy that would endure for many generations. The brightness that astounded the angels was also the brightness that would eventually be weakened by sin, but would never completely go out. This light, a secret fire that persisted over time, would flicker through prophets, sages, and righteous people. When the angels realized this secret fate, their jealousy turned to fear. Humanity itself would possess a portion of divine splendor greater than the hosts of heaven if Adam's light was meant to shine into innumerable lives. According to the legend of the hidden writings, Adam's light was so strong that even the great archangels covered their faces when he first appeared in the celestial realm. Because Adam's form reflected the Eternal's own limitless light, only the Eternal could see him without a veil. The paths of heaven were illuminated by his presence, transforming silence into song and night into day. The angels enjoyed this glow for a while, but as its significance became apparent that Adam's brightness identified him as the selected conduit for creation, envy gave way to discontent. As a result, Adam's light body's first breath signaled not just the dawn of humanity, but also the start of a conflict in the heavens. His brightness sparked both adoration and disobedience, peace and conflict. It revealed a future in which the memory of light, the spark of divine brilliance that no jealousy could extinguish, would always be a part of humanity despite its clay-bound state. The man of light who stood at the dawn of time illuminated the destiny of both heaven and earth, and in that first glowing breath, things started to change. Understanding the story of Adam and Eve through the ancient belief that their first clothing was made of a radiance that flowed directly from the essence of God, rather than fabric or skins, gives the story a completely different tone. They were dressed in what numerous ancient Ethiopian and Gnostic texts refer to as robes of pure light, not frail creatures ambling through the garden in a state of exposure. This light served as a shield, a covering, and a continual reminder that they were born into holiness. It was more than just a glow. As long as they were in harmony with the divine, this brilliance surrounded them like a garment woven of heaven itself, and it was an outward manifestation of their inner purity. These garments of light conveyed dignity, courage, and immortality, in contrast to earthly attire that conceals weakness and shame. They were inseparable from this covering. They did not just wear them. This kind of vision completely changes how the creation story is understood. Imagine strolling through a verdant garden, where the ground responded to each step with vitality, fruit glistened with dew and fragrance, and rivers flowed like crystal. Adam and Eve shone in that scene with a majesty that was both greater than the sun's radiance and as gentle as the dawn, breaking over a serene horizon. It was a brightness that inspired wonder in all of creation, rather than one that burned or blinded. Animals regarded them with respect rather than fear because they perceived a reflection of the Creator in them. They were untouchable, impervious to death and decay, and brimming with an unwavering serenity that enabled them to coexist peacefully with the cosmos in these garments of light. This hidden truth, that Adam and Eve were clothed in glory before the fall, is frequently mentioned in Ethiopian tradition, particularly in writings that have been preserved outside of the Western canon. They were sealed in the image of God by being clothed in light. The same idea is echoed in early Jewish mysticism and Gnostic texts, which depict the primordial couple as encased in a radiance too sacred for mortal eyes, rather than as naked. Only after their light was extinguished does their nakedness in the Genesis narrative become a metaphor. This interpretation amplifies the impact of their fall, not lessens it. They lost the very cloak of eternity, not just their innocence. We frequently associate clothing with modesty, protection, or ornamentation. However, life itself was what Adam and Eve wore. They were protected from corruption and the weakness of flesh by the garment of light. It was their assurance that they were not affected by the division between heaven and earth, their link to immortality. There was no place for fear in these clothes. Since they were impervious to death, they had no fear of it. Because light poured continuously from their very being, they had no fear of the dark. They were naturally fearless. It was not something they tried to cultivate. In this way, the garment represented their union with the source of divine power, rather than something external. The way this state is described in Gnostic texts is fascinating. Adam and Eve are frequently portrayed as radiant beings whose actual form could not be contained within the skin of a human. The constraints of mortality did not apply to their light bodies. By implying that before sin, the first humans lived. More like angels than flesh-bound mortals, the Ethiopian Bible, which contains books long excluded from Western scripture, preserves remnants of this vision. Because humanity was given a reflection of God's image that distinguished them from the rest of creation, some traditions even imply that angels themselves admired and envied this glory. It is impossible to imagine the depth of that radiance. Standing next to Adam and Eve in this light would be like witnessing living flames of holiness that were also friendly, joyful, and warm. It's possible that the garden itself glowed with greater beauty as their presence touched each leaf and rock. Not only would their laughter be audible, but it would also vibrate, filling the air with harmony. They moved with the grace of eternity, rather than being constrained by weariness or discomfort. Since nothing could hurt them, they were not burdened with the need for defense or survival. These garments symbolized their immortality, which rendered them impervious to corruption, illness, or deterioration. The moment of their fall is also altered by this realization. Adam and Eve lost their divine garments when they ate from the tree, in addition to learning about right and wrong. When their eyes were opened, they became acutely aware of their nakedness, but this nakedness went beyond simple physical exposure. It also included the loss of their immortal covering, the loss of radiance, and the loss of that garment of light. Not because their bodies were visible, but rather because their souls were exposed. They felt exposed and vulnerable. The fig leaves they hastily sewn together were pathetic substitutes, last-ditch efforts to conceal a disgrace that fabric could never fully conceal. The idea of the garment of light is more profound than ancient myth. It speaks to the core of what it means to be human. Humanity has long yearned for something that Adam and Eve lost in the fall. There is a longing for a past glory, a feeling that we were once more than we are now in every religion and culture. This desire can take many different forms, such as the quest for knowledge, immortality, or spiritual enlightenment. At its core, however, is the desire for the garment of light, the shroud of immortality, which once rendered death and fear helpless. The echoes of that garment can still be heard in mystical traditions today. The idea of the uncreated light in Eastern Christianity implies that saints and holy people might exhibit a tiny bit of that divine radiance even during their mortal lives. Tales of radiant faces, auras, or halos encircling the sacred are not fantastical myths. Rather, they serve as a reminder of the garment that humanity wore in its primordial form. Adam and Eve are frequently shown in Ethiopian icons and manuscripts with a faint glow, suggesting that their true form was never intended to be defined by brittle skin, but rather by eternal light. The future is also mentioned in the garment of light. The promise that humanity can regain it through restoration is still in place, just as Adam and Eve lost it due to disobedience. For this reason, salvation in many ancient traditions was associated with being clothed again in divine radiance rather than just forgiveness. This return is symbolized in sacred texts by the language of robes, white garments, and a shining countenance. Regaining courage, immortality, and harmony with the divine order is what it means to be clothed in light again. As a result, Adam and Eve's celestial attire is a fundamental truth about the past and future of humanity, not just a detail of ancient tradition. Their tale serves as a reminder that we were made to shine with the light of God, not to cower in weakness or hide behind garments of shame. We are encouraged to delve deeper into the narrative and acknowledge that what was once lost still lingers as a promise by the Ethiopian and Gnostic texts that preserve this memory. The garment of light, which reflects the glory of the Creator, without fear, corruption, or end, is not just a remembrance of Eden, but also a vision of what it means to be truly human. a new reality that was distinct from the angels, stars, and spirits that had previously existed entered the universe when the Creator gave Adam life. Something special was inside Adam, the very image of God, gleaming with a brilliance that no other creature had ever had. Instead of wearing earthly clothing, his form was clad in a robe of light, which demonstrated his intimacy with the Creator. The spirit that was placed inside Adam, a reflection of the divine breath that distinguished him from all the other heavenly hosts, was the source of this brilliance rather than Adam himself, because he embodied the mysteries of the cosmos, earth, and spirit, matter and light. The angels were awestruck by this creation. Realizing that the Creator's will was in play, many bowed in wonder, but not everyone was happy. One of the hosts was unable to accept this new order and viewed Adam with jealousy rather than reverence. Once regarded as one of the most brilliant angels, this creature refused to accept what he perceived as a slight to his own magnificence. According to the customs preserved in both Ethiopian texts and Gnostic narratives, refusing to bow was motivated by envy rather than pride. He could not bear the idea of another being ascending above him in the Creator's love after seeing Adam clothed in light that was brighter than his own. When Adam was brought forth, the brightness that the fallen one had once walked in, a being of fire and splendor, seemed faint in contrast. He believed that to bow to Adam was to acknowledge that a creature of dust now possessed a glory that was superior to his own. The Creator's instruction was straightforward. Respect Adam as the one selected to bear the breath of life and recognize him as the vehicle of divine purpose, because they were loyal to the one who created everything. The majority of the angels obeyed without question. However, the fallen one proclaimed that he would never submit to a clay creature. His heart swelled. In defiance, he boasted that Adam was merely soil taken from the earth, whereas he was composed of fire of a higher and purer essence. He was blinded by this comparison because he failed to recognize that the Creator's breath inside Adam was more valuable than any source of light or fire. More than disobedience, the jealousy that raged inside him was the seed of a cosmic conflict. He was angry at both Adam's creation and his predetermined fate. He hated it when he saw Adam and Eve's forms glowing with heavenly robes, their home ready in a paradise of wonder, and the Creator's love lavished upon them. To him, it seemed unfair that after serving for ages in brilliance, he was asked to humble himself in front of beings born of dust, while they were granted the inheritance of eternal life. This anger became rebellion. It is frequently emphasized in Ethiopian texts and mystical writings that Adam and Eve's light clothing was a shield of divine glory rather than just light. It kept them immortal, fearless, and close to the Creator. This was intolerable to the fallen one. He saw dust-born creatures dressed in light that was greater than his own, even though he had long thought of himself as the most brilliant of the hosts. He was unable to comprehend the mystery that Adam and Eve's brilliance was bestowed by divine favor rather than merited by their own strength. His resentment turned into rebellion and his jealousy into hatred. From this point on, human history was interwoven with the cosmic conflict. The refusal to bow was a rejection of the Creator's plan itself, not just a show of arrogance towards Adam. The fallen one's rebellion aimed to demonstrate that Adam and Eve were weak, undeserving, and susceptible to corruption, and that they did not deserve their robes of light. His plan became apparent. He would reveal their weakness and demonstrate his justification for not bowing if he could guide them away from the divine radiance and remove their celestial garments. So the first seeds of temptation were sown. Waiting for an opportunity to whisper into their hearts, the fallen one studied them. He longed to witness its destruction as he observed their naivete and unafraid joy. This was the beginning of a conflict that would last forever. Not just a minor argument or personal grievance. The jealousy of one being against Adam and his descendants started a never-ending battle that lasted from heaven to earth, from the beginning of creation until the end of ages. The emphasis on Adam's light is what makes this rebellion so remarkable in Ethiopian and Gnostic traditions. The radiant robe is a major element in this story, whereas in many other accounts, the focus is solely on pride. The fallen one was jealous of Adam's glory in addition to being proud. He desired to see that light go out, or at the very least, to possess it himself. He found it intolerable that people would wear what he once believed to be exclusive to creatures like himself. Therefore, the first act of war against light itself was his refusal to bow. This defiance caused the heavens to tremble. The angels that used to walk with him now turned their backs on him. His claim that fire was superior to dust, however, convinced some people to follow him into rebellion. The harmony of the heavens was broken by this division, and the Creator expelled him from his position of honor after observing the corruption of his heart. His light was twisted, his fire turned into a consuming flame, and his name was permanently associated with opposition. He was no longer clothed in the pure brightness he once possessed. For a while, Adam and Eve lived in peace in paradise, oblivious to the jealousy that was raging against them. But the fallen one's shadow hung near. He was going to strip them of their robes and drag them back into the dust that created them. Soon, his murmurs would infiltrate the garden, and his jealousy would be the reason for their initial downfall. Humanity was at the center of the cosmic struggle, carrying the burden of unending resistance as well as the gift of divine light. More than just a refusal to bow, the fallen one's jealousy was the beginning of a wound in creation, a rebellion that aimed to destroy the very divine purpose. A conflict broke out between light and envy, between obedience and rebellion, and between radiance and shadow as a result of that one act of defiance. And once it began, that struggle would reverberate through all ages, influencing the fate of both angels and humanity. The Garden of Eden was a haven of unfathomable peace, where the earth itself seemed to hum with life, and the air glistened with divine energy. The trees produced fruit that glistened with dew, ripe with the sustenance of paradise, and rivers wound through the landscape like ribbons of crystal. Adam and Eve stood in the center of this perfection, their bodies glowing, wearing the garments of light that distinguished them from the rest of creation. Their laughter was like a chorus resonating in the sky, and their every step exuded warmth and brightness. But even in this calm, there was a shadow, the faint presence of someone who had refused to bow and whose jealousy grew into guile. Among the created, the fallen one moved unseen, observing the couple who were more brilliant than any angel had ever been permitted to be. With a gentle and convincing voice, he whispered his way closer without using force, casting doubt on the perfection all around them. This temptation was centered on the tree in the middle of the garden, which is called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Although it was a test of obedience and trust, it carried the weight of decision and consequence, even though it wasn't inherently evil. Clothed in their luminous light, Adam and Eve had never experienced fear or shame. They had never known what it would be like to be cut off from the divine by disobedience. The fallen one recognized this and saw the chance to reveal the light that the Creator had bestowed upon them. What makes eating from this tree prohibited for you? He sowed the seed of curiosity in their minds by asking. His words, which were deliberately written to entice rather than coerce, were sultry rather than harsh. You won't die, surely. Adam and Eve's innocence started to falter under this delicate persuasion. Surely you will gain wisdom beyond what you already possess. Yes, they were creatures of light, but even light is captivated by the unknown. Something deep within them, a desire to learn, to experience, to go beyond the limits set by their Creator, was beckoned by the glow of the forbidden fruit, the charm of wisdom, and the desire for independence. The deception was successful by suggestion rather than coercion. Despite having a divine nature, Adam and Eve were also sentient beings with the capacity for wonder and curiosity. The fallen one took advantage of this, offering the fruit as a chance to surpass even their own brilliance rather than as a danger. He whispered, "Your eyes will open if you eat." Awe and fear were evoked by the idea that you will be like the Creator, knowing both good and evil. They had been fearless in their glowing forms, but now, for the first time, a shadow of doubt touched them. Was life more than the glowing balance they had always experienced? Is there a knowledge that would make them better, a wisdom that has been denied? Eve was the first to reach for the fruit, her fingers shaky as they touched the glowing flesh. She saw only the possibility of comprehension and the promise of enlightenment, not danger. Adam was astonished and hesitant as he watched her. The whispers of the fallen one coiled themselves around their hearts, telling them to put their faith in themselves instead of the Creator's will. Their light body's radiance appeared to flicker for a brief moment, as faint as the moon's first shadow. The once unbroken brilliance faltered, indicating that even though innocence is radiant, it can be tempted. The act of taking the fruit appeared insignificant at the time, but the repercussions were enormous. The light that had encased them started to break, not in smoke or flame, but rather in a faint crackling that reached deep into their souls. Their light faded as though the divine light had been partially extinguished, and they felt vulnerable in a way they had never experienced before. Once inseparable from their forms, the garments of light now felt inadequate, frail, and far away. For the first time, they saw themselves as creatures with weakness, fear, and mortality, and as distinct from the divine. The immediate result was a deep awareness of oneself and one's limitations, not just a loss of brilliance. Adam and Eve gazed at one another with fresh eyes, their once bright bodies now subdued and brittle. The immortality and fearlessness of their light bodies, the purity that had characterized them, had been shattered. They experienced the vulnerability of flesh, the first tinge of shame, and the weight of mortality bearing down on them. Once resonating in perfect harmony, the garden appeared to be quieter, as though the air itself had changed. The fallen one was pleased to see that the divine plan had been thwarted. Once impervious in their robes of light, the couple now understood how fleeting their existence was. The nature of the human experience emerged as a result of this decision. The memory of this moment is preserved in Ethiopian and Gnostic writings as the beginning of mortality, fear, and separation from the eternal brilliance, rather than just the acquisition of knowledge. The story explores the serious repercussions of ignoring the fullness of divine light, in addition to disobedience. Adam and Eve had seen another world, but in pursuing it, they had broken the light that united them. Now diminished, the light body, a gift of immortality and divine favor, was dispersed throughout the physical world, instead of being contained within their forms. This act of temptation was the culmination of the fallen one's envy, which had begun when Adam's genius was displayed. His goal had been to weaken the bond between God and humanity, to lessen the brightness that identified Adam and Eve as special light-bearers. Even though he did not completely destroy their essence, the fragmentation of their light body brought about the creation of a new reality, one in which people would live in a world that mirrored both the light they had lost and the shadow that now accompanied them. A conflict between potential and limitation was also brought about by this act. Adam and Eve were no longer able to navigate the world with the unwavering courage of luminous creatures. They would feel the weakness of flesh, hunger, and exhaustion. However, the memory of their light persisted, a dim radiance at the center of their being that suggested what they were and might be again. Even though the garments of light were broken, the divine spark inside of them remained, a silent reminder of the glory that had not completely faded. This makes the story both tragic and hopeful. Their lives were still shaped by the echo of their first radiance, even though they were now dressed in the weakened and dimmed forms of flesh. Every decision, every act of defiance or faith was infused with the memory of that light body, the ideal clothes they had worn in the past. Envy of the fallen one persisted, constantly attempting to push humanity farther into the dark, but there was still hope for recovery. The radiance of Adam and Eve's original light would always be present in them and their offspring. More than just a moment of disobedience, the breaking of Adam and Eve's light body in Eden marked the start of a human journey entwined with temptation, decision, and consequence. The garden's perfection gave way to a world where awareness of good and evil, mortality, and vulnerability became defining traits. Despite their fractures, their divine radiance endured as a seed of hope, a hidden memory, and a constant reminder that humanity's initial state was one of luminous glory rather than dust, a profound upheaval that altered the very essence of existence. The passage from divine radiance to mortal flesh was not a gentle transition. After their act of disobedience, Adam and Eve, who had previously been dressed in robes of light, woke up to a more intense, dense, and relentless reality. Now, like a candle fighting a draft, the light that had been inseparable from their forms flickered dimly. There was uncertainty where there had been fearlessness. Vulnerability had replaced immortality. The bright creatures who had moved through the Garden of Eden with ease now faced a world of restrictions, a world in which every breath required effort, every movement required strength, and every choice had consequences. It was shocking to experience hunger for the first time. Food had always been easy in the garden. The abundance of the land and the fruits of the trees had flowed in accordance with their needs. Food's sweetness now had a price. They had to work, to cultivate, to comprehend the limitations of the material world, to maintain the delicate flesh that had taken the place of their light bodies. Once an act of communion with the divine provision, each meal has come to serve as a reminder of one's own mortality. The body needed sustenance, vulnerability, and attention because it was no longer glowing and impervious. It hungered, it ached, and it never stopped reminding them that life was finite. Pain was also a new friend. The harsh reality of the world now hit Adam and Eve, who had never experienced fear or harm. They had never experienced the first scratches, the bruises from tripping, or the exhaustion from exertion before. A constant reminder that flesh was not made for the brilliance they had known. The subtle hum of fragility pervaded every moment. In a body of light, sleep had been superfluous, but now it was essential. Rest was now a submission to the limitations of a mortal shell rather than a pause in eternal awareness. Weariness and pain turned into harsh, unforgiving teachers that led humanity to recognize its own limits. The knowledge of death accompanied the transition to flesh. Their once defining immortal radiance had served as a barrier against deterioration and disintegration. All living things were now subject to the unstoppable march of time. They were reminded of the fleeting nature of life by the trees, rivers, animals, and even their own bodies. This awareness was different from any fear they had experienced because it went right to the heart of life. Death was not merely a possibility. It existed in every pulse, in every brief instant of life. From that point on, the human experience would be defined by the duality of the joy of life and the sorrow of impermanence. Emotion also assumed a new role. Flesh added complexity to the light body, which had been fearless and unconcerned by uncertainty or grief. Fatigue brought frustration, hunger brought impatience, and fear came from the certainty of death. Even love, which had once been pure and radiant, now carried the burden of separation, longing, and anxiety. Limitations now loomed over every bond and relationship. The necessity of navigating a world that no longer bowed easily to their will had tempered the purity of existence. Humanity had devolved into a conflation of dust and divinity, light remembered but never fully recovered, and brilliance and fragility. Work ceased to be an option and became a necessity. Once naturally abundant, the garden now required work to grow. Every seed needed to be tended to, and every fruit needed to be picked. Adam and Eve learnt that sustenance required preparation, effort, and foresight, and that survival was no longer assured. Their bodies, which had once moved with ease and had perfect endurance, now needed time to rest and heal. Joints stiffened, muscles ached, and even walking could be exhausting. Humanity gained an understanding of responsibility through this labor that light could never have provided. Physical strength was a gift, but it came with limitations and required constant balancing of ability and will. Vulnerability to the elements further defined the human condition. They had been protected by light from hunger, pain, and temperature fluctuations, but flesh was bared. The sun could burn, the wind could chill, and sickness could come suddenly. Every season, every storm, and every environmental shift served as a reminder that life was fleeting. They had to adapt and survive where they had previously navigated life with ease. They became more aware of caution, foresight, and the impending grasp of death's unstoppable grasp. Death and sleep came to represent their changed state. They now required rest in order to survive, whereas previously their consciousness had been unbroken. They briefly gave themselves up to vulnerability while they slept, and for the first time they saw shadows and dreams. Hints of the spiritual remains of their former light, blending with the limitations of flesh, made these moments both healing and illuminating. Once unthinkable, death became a reality that framed every decision and action. In addition to changing their physical form, the change from light to clay brought about the temporal boundaries that would eventually govern human existence. Fear, shame, and responsibility became more apparent as a result of the emotional transition to flesh. Once unafraid in the light of their brilliance, Adam and Eve now hesitated and felt self-conscious. Their actions had an impact on the delicate world around them as well as on themselves. Because they were beings of light, Eden had been in perfect harmony. However, the garden now needed to be carefully tended, and the fallen one's presence meant that temptation and dishonesty could creep in. The earliest humans started to comprehend moral decision-making, vulnerability, and the significance of ethical responsibility. Longing became entangled with pain, death, and labor. Dimmed but still present in their consciousness was the memory of the radiant state. They could feel the shadow of what had been lost, even in the labor of flesh. The immortality, the fearlessness, the freedom of unbroken light. Human instincts were molded by this desire, which fueled aspiration, curiosity, and spiritual longing. Even as humanity battled the limitations of the material form, it was the silent echo of paradise, a memory that would ring true through every generation, reminding us of our first glory. Their relationship with the divine was also reshaped by the change from light to clay. They now felt distance and longing, whereas previously their connection had been instantaneous, unmediated, and radiant. They used ritual, prayer, and introspection as means of re-establishing their connection to the divine presence they had naturally embodied. Humanity discovered that the way to the Creator no longer happened by accident, but rather needed commitment, discipline, and intention. Their flesh turned into a bridge and a barrier, a constraint that tried their faith, but also a medium for expressing devotion. Therefore, the first humans entered the human condition with bodies that were marked by mortality, hunger, and fragility. Adam and Eve had been brilliant creatures, fearless, immortal, and clothed in divine light. Now that they were flesh and blood creatures, they felt the burden of living in a world that required work, brought pain, and set boundaries for time. The profound change from light to clay altered morality, consciousness, and the human experience. In general, the boundaries of a once limitless life were now marked by hunger, pain, exhaustion, and death. No longer abstract ideas, but tangible realities. However, the dim recollection of their former brilliance remained, a concealed ember. Within the clay-bound form, even in this new state, it was a whisper of hope for healing, of a return to divine favor, of a light that would never completely go out. The journey of humanity had begun, not just as physical beings, but as beings with the memory of light, striving within the bounds of mortality, and living with the conviction that the divine spark within them could lead them to redemption and the restoration of what had been lost. Adam and Eve's transformation from luminous beings into flesh-bound humans had an impact on the universe, not just on their own existence. Once united in their awe and obedience, the heavenly hosts were now split. Given that temptation and disobedience had shattered the light body, which had once been unadulterated and pure, some angels lamented the loss of human brilliance. Others, who were already sympathetic to the fallen one, muttered that people were weak and undeserving of God's favor, a field ripe for manipulation. A new theater in which his influence could spread and take root was what the fallen angel, whose envy had prompted the first act of rebellion, saw in humanity. The first cosmic conflict, which would reverberate throughout the earth, the heavens, and the hearts of all subsequent human beings, emerged from this divergence. In this way, humanity transcended its physical form and became symbols, vessels, and participants in a conflict that was much bigger than themselves. Even though it was faint, brittle, and dispersed, the light that still existed in Adam and Eve served as a reminder of what the fallen one was not allowed to have, and was thus a target for annihilation. Through obedience, introspection, and alignment with divine will, humans could regain the light, according to the angels who were faithful to the Creator. The followers of the fallen one, on the other hand, aimed to break the bond between people and the divine spark that still existed within them by fostering uncertainty, disbelief, and rebellion. This paved the way for an internal and external conflict that was reflected in the human condition but manifested in the heavens. This division is vividly portrayed in the Gnostic writings and Ethiopian texts. They portray the celestial court as shattered, with some angels mourning the fall of humanity and others scheming to take advantage of it. Among mortal lives, the fallen one and his disciples moved invisibly, whispering lies, intensifying desires that led away from light, and offering tempting but ultimately destructive alternatives. In the meantime, the faithful angels continued to be on guard, occasionally stepping in through inspiration, dreams, or subtle guidance in an effort to help people realize that light still existed within them. It was a strategic, continuous struggle for power, wisdom, and the alignment of hearts with divine purpose, rather than a straightforward good versus evil conflict. This cosmic struggle became symbolic within each human. The battle between staying in the light and giving in to the darkness was a reflection of the battle in heaven. Whether intentionally acknowledged or not, loyalty was reflected in every decision, no matter how big or small. Humanity's dimmed light was a target and a compass. It provided direction towards development, love, and spiritual enlightenment, but it also drew forces determined to obstruct its course. The fallen one and his followers used temptation, desire, fear, and doubt as tools to try to reach more people. Because of the struggle between luminous potential and shadowed interference, even the most routine decisions had spiritual significance. The first battlefield was the garden, which was once the center of undisturbed light. The symbolic reverberations of that early conflict endured over time, despite Adam and Eve's physical exile. The legacy of light and vulnerability was passed down to each generation, the possibility of divine radiance tempering by flesh's vulnerability. Cosmic forces continued to use humanity's free will, a gift that had previously been put to the test at the tree, to carry out their plans. Both demons and angels relied on influence, persuasion, and the subtle molding of perception. Neither could destroy the divine spark or force obedience. The moral and ethical aspects of human existence also showed signs of the conflict. The invisible battle for Adam's legacy was fought in the arenas of morality and immorality, trust and deceit. Humans aligned themselves with the light and became allies of the forces pursuing restoration when they behaved in accordance with divine principles, that is, with courage, humility, and compassion. They unintentionally gave the forces of evil more power when they gave in to violence, pride, or greed. Therefore, the human soul was a microcosm of the greater cosmic conflict, both a prize and a battlefield. According to historical accounts, certain angels were designated as guardians or guides, whose job it was to keep people safe from the influence of the fallen one and his adherents. According to certain traditions, these guardian spirits would step in during times of need, providing guidance, motivation, or assistance to help people return to the divine spark. As all of this was going on, the fallen one grew more crafty, creating more subtle temptations, taking advantage of weaknesses, and escalating doubts. The war was persistent and strategic, spanning both visible and invisible realms, and its effects were brought about by human agency. Humanity's vulnerability became both a problem and a possible asset in this ongoing conflict. Although the fallen one could take advantage of flaws, he found humans unpredictable simply because they had the ability to make decisions, think things through, and come back to light. Humans had dynamic free will, which allowed them to align, defy, or redeem themselves, in contrast to angels, whose paths were essentially set. As a result, the cosmic war was dynamic and constantly changing, with human decisions influencing results in ways that even celestial beings could not completely predict. Light and shadow had meanings that went beyond the material or spiritual realms. It stood for awareness and bewilderment, connection and disconnection, knowledge and ignorance. Every moment of selfless love or brave integrity, every act of obedience to divine guidance, was a tiny victory for the forces of light. On the other hand, deceit, cruelty, or neglect gave the forces of evil more power and spread the jealousy and disobedience that had been sown in the early dispute over Adam's brilliance. Every human life became an expression of that struggle, consciously or unconsciously echoing the war that started in Eden. The battle was not static, it was ongoing. This cosmic conflict even indirectly affected human institutions like family, community, and culture. Humanity's inner light was strengthened in environments where justice, love, and compassion thrived. The shadows took root where oppression, greed, or fear were dominant. The decisions made by a single individual, a single heart, had an impact on the balance of forces vying for control or harmony that went well beyond the realm of immediate perception, reflecting the macrocosm. The continuing cosmic conflict, which served as a reminder that Adam's legacy had turned the world into a battlefield of light and darkness, was therefore inextricably linked to humanity's destiny. Therefore, the echo of that initial conflict can be found in every heart. As spiritual imprints, the recollection of the robes of light, the splendor of Adam's first form, and the jealousy of the fallen one endure. They lead, entice, motivate, and test. Every individual experiences times when they are in harmony with the light that is their innate right or the darkness that aims to stifle it. Decisions, desires, and struggles that characterize the human condition are subtle but unrelenting manifestations of the war that started with the refusal to bow, the temptation of the garden, and the shattering of divine light. This cosmic struggle, which is reflected in the soul and manifested in the heavens, is not just a theoretical one. Life itself is shaped by this personal struggle. At the center is humanity, both a prize and a participant, able to reclaim light, fend off darkness, and maintain the once whole divine spark. Echoes of Eden, ripples that travel through time and space, are carried by every act of awareness, bravery, or faith. Despite its fractures, Adam's legacy endures as a reminder that light and shadow are interwoven in the fabric of existence, and that each person's soul's decisions will ultimately determine humanity's fate. Scriptures that were never included in the mainstream Western canon preserve the echoes of Adam's initial brilliance, his light body, and the cosmic struggle surrounding humanity. The Apocalypse of Adam is one of these texts that depicts a primordial world in which the first human being was closely associated with divine knowledge, a being of light whose consciousness transcended the confines of flesh. In these texts, Adam serves as a vehicle for the expression and preservation of the divine order, in addition to being the ancestor of humanity. Language that expresses both majesty and an otherworldly luminosity describes his first form, radiant and fearless, as a being whose presence radiated life and authority to the cosmos. This hidden story is further developed in the Book of Enoch. It describes the cosmic tension brought on by Adam's existence and describes how angels and fallen beings were observed over the first humans. The angels who watch acknowledge the light that resides within people and are in awe of its purity and the intimacy it provides with the Creator. Envious and cunning, the rebellious angels try to sway humanity in the meantime, laying the groundwork for temptation, deceit, and ultimately exile from paradise. According to Enoch's writings, humanity was not merely a passive creation, but rather a character in a cosmic drama, a role that shapes moral conflicts and spiritual realities to this day. The text highlights that Adam's fall was a turning point in a greater celestial story, where free will, divine justice, and the conflict between light and shadow intersect. Rather than just being a tale of disobedience, Adam and the first humans, in their light bodies, are vividly portrayed in the Ethiopian canon, which preserves the larger collection of biblical texts, including the Book of Enoch and other apocryphal writings. The Ethiopian tradition preserves the memory of a radiant humanity and the spiritual lessons learnt from their metamorphosis, in contrast to the Western Bible, which condenses and leaves out many of these stories. A framework that combines history, theology, and spirituality preserves Adam and Eve's original form, their robes of light, their fearlessness, and the cosmic envy they aroused. This canon shows that the fall was as much about the loss of divine awareness as it was about the transition from immortality to mortality, providing insights into the early human experience as not just physical, but deeply spiritual. These texts were gradually eliminated or marginalized in Western Bibles for theological and political reasons. Certain narratives were given priority during the canonization process, while others that were thought to be esoteric, challenging to understand, or potentially disruptive of established doctrine were left out. Stories that focused on Adam's pre-flesh state, his first body of light, and the complex cosmic dynamics surrounding humanity were frequently left out. This omission has led to a Western biblical tradition that obscures the deeper metaphysical and cosmic dimensions preserved elsewhere, and places a strong emphasis on the fall's material and moral aspects. The Ethiopian canon, on the other hand, upholds a more expansive and cohesive vision in which the memory of the luminous beginning is never completely forgotten, and human destiny is inextricably linked to celestial realities. Humanity's battle with death, temptation, and divine purpose is revealed by these hidden scriptures to be not only personal, but also cosmically significant. The fall of Adam, his transformation from light to clay, and the ensuing jealousy and strife among angels are depicted as pivotal moments in the universe's formation. The texts stress how closely heavenly occurrences and spiritual legacies are linked to the human condition, vulnerability, desire, and moral decision. This viewpoint reinterprets the human story as a multi-layered narrative, where cosmic tension, free will, and divine intention all come together, rather than as a straightforward tale of sin and punishment. The remnant of divine light, a glimmer of the original brilliance that the fallen one longs for and the devoted angels work to preserve, is carried within humanity. It is no accident that these customs have survived in Ethiopia. Scriptures, liturgies, and oral histories that preserve the memory of Adam's first form and the cosmic context of humanity's early experiences have been preserved for centuries by the Ethiopian Church. Monastic communities preserved knowledge that was vanishing elsewhere by meticulously transcribing, studying, and disseminating these texts. Adam's initial brilliance serves as a reminder in Ethiopian mysticism that people are spiritual beings at their core, and that the light lost in the autumn is not irreversible, but can be restored by submitting to God's will. These preserved tales emphasize that the divine spark is still accessible despite moral and physical constraints, providing a continuous thread that links the primordial world to modern human spiritual life. The Ethiopian canon also emphasizes how humanity's fall and restoration are relational. Adam and Eve are presented as archetypes whose experiences shed light on the relationship between cosmic consequences and human choice, rather than just as cautionary tales. According to the texts, the divine knowledge that was once fully present in Adam's light body is now partially concealed but still active in each and every human soul. This concealed knowledge, which is frequently referred to as gnosis in Gnostic traditions, implies that people have the ability to see, react to, and restore the light that was once entirely theirs, even when they are mortal. The story supports the idea that humanity's present problems, desire, fear, mortality, and moral conflict are mirror images of a more profound spiritual conflict that started in Eden but has persisted throughout time. By claiming that the loss of divine light was a transformative event with continuing significance rather than a final verdict, the Apocalypse of Adam, the Book of Enoch, and the Ethiopian canon all challenge the conventional narrative. Adam's transformation into flesh marked the start of a complicated interaction between divine direction, celestial influence, and human choice, rather than the extinguishment of the spark. Humans still have agency, potential, and the innate memory of what was once radiant, but angels and fallen ones still engage with us. According to the texts, moral bravery, ethical judgment, and spiritual awareness are means of recovering some of the lost radiance and taking part in the settlement of the cosmic struggle over humanity's fate. Furthermore, the omissions in the Western narrative lead to a partial understanding of human origins and potential, as these hidden scriptures demonstrate. The Western account concentrates only on disobedience, sin, and punishment, ignoring Adam's first body of light, the robes of radiance, or the envious responses of celestial beings. The Ethiopian and apocryphal texts, on the other hand, highlight a multi-layered reality in which cosmic dynamics, spiritual growth, and human history are all intertwined. Even though it is hidden, the divine spark is still present and presents chances for humanity to transcend the material world and achieve enlightenment, redemption, and understanding. A more profound picture is revealed by these surviving texts. Humans were originally radiant. Adam was a being of light. And while the fall brought mortality and struggle, it did not eliminate divinity. The remains of heavenly splendor are still present in humanity, which is a physical and spiritual entity. Envy and rebellion sparked the cosmic struggle that is still subtly influencing human experience and providing avenues for light reclamation. These texts, which have been preserved in Ethiopia and other obscure traditions, serve as a reminder that the story of Adam is not just one of loss, but rather of a lifelong journey that includes hardship, promise, and an invitation to awaken the inner light that has lain dormant in every human being. By providing a lens through which we can see the hidden, ancient dimensions of creation, the scripture's preservation in Ethiopia guarantees that the memory of Adam's radiant form, the robes of light, and the cosmic tensions surrounding humanity will endure. They bear witness to a world in which the earliest human experiences are not limited to metaphor, but rather continue to be a vibrant and significant aspect of spiritual knowledge that is just waiting to be rediscovered by those who are prepared. To look past the obvious in canonical texts, the story of humanity's luminous beginnings and Adam's initial radiance strikes a remarkable chord across various faiths and mystical traditions, reflecting common themes of divine light, primordial consciousness, and spiritual inheritance. Adam Kadmon is the archetypal human, the primordial being who embodies the entirety of divine light before it was broken into the material world. According to Jewish mysticism, especially Kabbalistic teachings, Adam Kadmon is portrayed as a cosmic blueprint, a glowing vessel that allows the divine emanations, or sephirot, to manifest rather than as a single physical form. This idea highlights the possibility of spiritual restoration, the connection between the human soul and the divine source, and the inherent wholeness of humanity. According to this theory, each person possesses a spark of this ideal light that needs to be nourished, cultivated, and orientated in order to return to its origin. According to the teachings, Adam's descent from light to flesh represented a spread of divine consciousness into the world, as well as a physical change, posing both difficulties and chances for spiritual growth. In Christianity, the idea of the second Adam, a title ascribed to Jesus Christ, expresses the echoes of Adam's lost brilliance. The second Adam is portrayed as the Redeemer, the entity who restores the possibility of divine alignment and spiritual illumination, whereas the first Adam symbolizes the original humanity, the one who fell from radiant grace into mortality. In this sense, Jesus is viewed as a link between the divine and humanity, a living example of what Adam used to be and what people can strive to become. The idea of a bright pre-fallen human nature strikes a deep chord in this context because it emphasizes that faith, obedience, and alignment with divine purpose can restore the spiritual potential that was lost in Eden. References to the Bible emphasize how humanity witnesses the complete fulfillment of the divine blueprint in Jesus, an echo of the original light body that leads followers of Christ towards healing and transformation. The second Adam offers a spiritual way for people to recover some of their former brilliance by embodying both moral rectitude and the restoration of cosmic order. The idea that Adam's soul was a being of light is also preserved in Islamic teachings. Adam's original nature is described as pure, radiant, and intrinsically linked to God's essence in certain mystical interpretations. Adam's special creation is emphasized in the Quran, and Islamic tradition describes the conversation between God and the angels at the time of Adam's creation, emphasizing both his superior status and the resentment of those who did not see his importance. Beyond Adam, the Prophet Muhammad is frequently referred to in Islamic esotericism as the first light, Nur Muhammad, a radiant archetype that channels divine guidance. The idea of primordial light depicts a lineage of spiritual illumination that leads people towards awareness of the divine and connects Adam's soul with the continuity of revelation. Here, Adam's fall is not just a warning story. Rather, it is a part of a larger story that emphasizes how humans can access, recognize, and reflect the original light by consciously aligning themselves with God's will. The recognition of an initial state of luminosity, a human form that is closer to divine perfection than the mortal experience suggests, is a common theme among these three religions. The primordial human, also known as Adam Kadmon, the first Adam, or the soul of light, is a historical and metaphysical point of reference that symbolizes what was lost due to disobedience and what can be regained through spiritual endeavor. This radiant archetype serves as a spiritual compass and a reminder that divine intention and human potential are inextricably linked. It is not just symbolic. Mystical traditions frequently stress that the divine light that permeates every person is the surviving portion of this earliest brilliance, directing moral behavior, prayer, meditation, and ethical contemplation. Because of this, humans are both heirs and participants in the cosmic drama that Adam's creation started, and they can reclaim pieces of the light through awareness, intention, and moral behavior. The scattering of light into vessels and the resulting shattering are described in Kabbalistic texts as a metaphor for the disintegration of divine consciousness within human beings. The conditions for moral conflict, spiritual pursuits, and ethical responsibility were established by this cosmic fracture. Similar to this, Christian theology views the fall as a disturbance of peace and unity with God, and it proposes redemption via Christ as a means of reviving the inner light. Islamic interpretations emphasize Adam's original light as a natural dignity that humanity is endowed with, along with the duty to nurture and protect it. According to these traditions, humanity's present imperfection is a transient state that can be overcome by spiritual practice, education, and submission to divine guidance. All three religions' mystic texts stress that the return to light is a personal and a communal one. Through moral behavior, spiritual pursuits, and a closer relationship with God, humans are called to acknowledge and nurture their innate luminosity, the spark that endured the fall. This could be demonstrated in Judaism by reflecting on the Sephirot and adhering to Adam Kadmon's blueprint. It is demonstrated in Christianity by imitating Christ's virtues and partaking in sacraments that strengthen one's relationship with God. It is fostered in Islam by acknowledging God's direction, upholding moral standards, and contemplating the spiritual realities represented by the Nur Muhammad. Although each path has its own unique expression and ritual, they all adhere to the same fundamental idea, that humanity is inherently bright, and that the fall signifies the separation rather than the destruction of that light. The wider cosmic ramifications of Adam's creation and fall are also clarified by these mystical viewpoints. Not only is humanity capable of recovering light, but it also influences the harmony of spiritual forces. According to previous stories, angels and other celestial beings care about humanity's destiny and react to decisions that either support or contradict divine will. Mystical writings frequently emphasize how moral and spiritual choices have an impact on the flow of light and the appearance of divine order in the world, reverberating beyond the individual. Therefore, the spiritual landscape of every era is shaped by the echoes of Adam's light body, which are not limited to history. They serve as a reminder of the potential that still exists within the human soul and offer guidance. The idea that humanity began in a state closer to the divine, with qualities that transcended material existence, is universally demonstrated by the resonance of Adam's first light across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Through the concepts of the soul of light, the second Adam, or Kabbalistic cosmology, these traditions uphold an optimistic yet sobering view of human potential. They serve as a reminder to believers that moral obligation, spiritual aspirations, and remembrance of the original light interact dynamically throughout the human life journey. By interacting with these mystical teachings, people discover their inner brilliance and realize that their lives are part of a larger, multifaceted story that started before Genesis and is still being told in the visible and invisible worlds. The narrative of Adam's bright beginning and humanity's capacity for redemption endures through these interfaith viewpoints, providing direction, contemplation, and motivation. Cultural and religious barriers are overcome by the universal theme of divine light, the fall, and the potential for reclamation, proving that the memory of a radiant humanity endures across many traditions. The first human, their original light, and the continuous quest to re-establish a connection with the divine source from which all life and consciousness originate, are all better understood thanks to the contributions of each mystical voice. In order to respect their spiritual heritage and navigate the difficulties and decisions of mortal life, the teachings encourage believers to identify the pieces of that primordial light within themselves. The world outside of Eden was a harsh and strange place where Adam and Eve's original light body had lost its brightness, leaving them and their offspring to face the full force of death. Toil and struggle took the place of the garden's once immaculate harmony, which was a place of radiant energy and effortless communion with the Creator. Because humans had to work to cultivate the land, struggle with hunger, and confront the limitations of their frail, flesh-bound existence, every day became a reminder of what had been lost. The material and spiritual facets of life were entwined. In this new reality, the soul held the memory of its former luminous state, a reminder of the divine spark that still lingered within, while the body felt pain and exhaustion. Human experience would be defined by the tension created by the contrast between the light body and mortal flesh. A yearning for the original wholeness that seemed far away, nearly forgotten, yet subtly present in every thought and heartbeat. The earliest generations outside of Eden found it difficult to adapt to this strange world, battling not only the physical demands, but also feelings and instincts that had been heightened by their impending death. The tale of Cain and Abel is among the oldest and most striking instances of the fall's lasting effects on interpersonal relationships. Abel symbolized a continuation of the spiritual memory of Eden, an acknowledgement of the Creator's presence, and the importance of being in accordance with divine will by caring for flocks and making sincere sacrifices. In contrast, Cain experienced feelings of inadequacy, frustration, and envy that were heightened by his realization of his own unrealized potential. Tragically, the tension between them erupted into the first act of fratricide, a violent rupture that marked the growing impact of mortal weaknesses on human behavior. This episode emphasizes how the fall shaped human dynamics, desires, and decisions long after the initial exile from the garden, and was not just a historical event. The tale of Cain and Abel also illustrates how human consciousness is still impacted by the memory of the lost light. The spiritual remnant of Eden endures in the desire for justice, connection, and divine recognition despite the rage, violence, and jealousy. Abel's loyalty and Cain's jealousy illustrate a conflict that would recur throughout history. The desire To be in harmony with the Creator and the propensity to act out of fear or selfishness, the soul still had remnants of its original brilliance, guiding conscience, inspiration, and the desire for redemption. But humans, now conscious of their mortality, had to deal with instincts and impulses that were heightened by the body's limitations. This internal conflict, which existed from the start, shows how the fall was both a loss and a starting point for a new kind of spiritual education that called for knowledge, discernment, and moral bravery in a world where consequences shaped reality. The difficulties of living outside of Eden increased as the number of generations increased. Alongside greed, conflict, and territorial disputes, communities were established, resources were disputed, and human ingenuity emerged. A continual reminder of humanity's transformation from light to clay was the labor-intensive process of cultivating land, constructing shelter, and maintaining life. Remembering the bright past was both consoling and taxing. It stoked desire for virtue, creativity, and spirituality, while simultaneously escalating annoyance at the constraints of death. Despite the pressures and diversions of physical life, humans started to see patterns in their behavior, moral lessons in their suffering, and ways to cultivate the lingering glimmer of divine light within themselves. The ethical systems, religious rituals, and cultural traditions of early civilizations were influenced by these teachings, which were frequently passed down orally. They also preserved bits of information about the primordial light that once pervaded humanity. Life after Eden has moral and spiritual ramifications that go beyond personal experience to include societal fate. Human governance, interpersonal relationships, and ethical standards are all impacted by the fall's legacy. Although jealousy, ambition, and conflict are portrayed as the results of death and being cut off from divine light, the eternal potential for kindness, generosity, and creativity shows that the original light is still present. Prophets and spiritual teachers from many cultures and eras have emphasized the need to remember this lost genius and have urged people to pursue wisdom, uphold moral principles, and develop inner awareness. By bridging the gap between past potential and present reality, these endeavors reflect an ongoing attempt to reconcile human nature with the memory of what was once radiant and immortal. The high stakes of life outside of Eden are illustrated by bloodshed, such as that which occurred when Cain killed Abel. Death intensifies feelings and responses, and when the light body's shielding clarity is lost, people become more prone to anger, jealousy, and impetuous behavior. Even in the most dire circumstances, however, the traces of Adam and Eve's original light offer subtly guiding light, arousing conscience and inspiring regret, introspection, and the prospect of atonement. As a result, humanity's spiritual struggle is inextricably linked to its social and familial experiences. Every act of kindness or cruelty reflects the constant conflict between the divine potential and the fallen state. This duality serves as the cornerstone for generational virtue cultivation, ritual practice, and moral instruction. Early spiritual narratives, symbolism, and cultural memory are shaped by the need to remember the lost light. Communities are reminded of a higher reality. The divine spark is cultivated, and the difficulties of mortal life are navigated with the help of stories, songs, and rituals. In myths and religious tales, the memory of Adam's light body, the garments of radiance, and the original harmony of Eden are preserved and passed down from one generation to the next as a source of both inspiration and warning. Even when the path is obscured by physical limitations, social pressures, and personal shortcomings, humans are taught to respect these traces of their original state, work towards moral alignment, and seek connection with the divine source. They Spiritual lesson ingrained in these early human experiences is profound, despite the fact that life outside of Eden is characterized by suffering and loss. The memory of the light, though veiled, is never completely extinguished. It exhorts people to develop awareness, seek alignment with higher ideals, and acknowledge the sacred in both the world and themselves. The conflicts of labor, jealousy, and violence are not only punitive, they are also instructive, provoking, thought about human nature, free will, and accountability. The persistence of the original light during these hardships provides hope, direction, and a reminder that humanity's fate is linked to its ability to recall, reclaim, and live in accordance with the spark that remains from its initial, bright beginnings. Examining life after the fall reveals that the human story is both tragic and illuminating. It is characterized by difficulties, but also by the enduring potential for a return to the divine. The story of Cain and Abel, the hardships of daily life, and the ethical conflicts of prehistoric human society demonstrate that mortality is not only a constraint, but a realm where the surviving traces of divine light continue to have an impact, influencing perception, directing decisions, and maintaining hope. Every human action and moral choice becomes a place where the memory of Eden can be revered or disregarded, and where the soul's dormant brilliance can either be revealed or kept hidden. Reflection on the ways that the original light endures in a world molded by flesh, mortality, and the lingering shadow of envy, conflict, and human frailty is encouraged by the tale of humanity's struggle following the fall, which has been preserved. In secret writings and mystical traditions, prophets have been guiding lights throughout human history, charged with reminding people of their ancestry's connection to divine radiance and the first Adam's luminous nature. In addition to addressing current social and moral issues, these messengers' message went beyond their own eras to address the deeper, spiritual yearning that exists within every human soul. Prophets were divine human go-betweens in all traditions, showing the way back to the light that had been lost during the passage from Eden to the mortal world. They called people to discover the divine spark within themselves, to develop an awareness of moral and spiritual truths, and to work towards alignment with the principles that reflected the brilliance of Adam's original light body. Their role was both restorative and instructive. This restorative mission is most profoundly exemplified by the idea of Jesus as the new Adam. According to Christian doctrine, the first Adam represents the beginning of humanity's descent into mortality as a creature that had lost the Creator's bestowed radiance and spiritual purity. As the second Adam, Jesus stands for the potential for rebirth, a person who embodies humanity's inherent potential, untarnished by the fallout from disobedience. Jesus shows that the divine light that was once present in Adam can be recovered by offering a path for re-establishing the lost spiritual alignment via his life, teachings, and sacrifice. According to this story, salvation is a reawakening of the soul to its original radiant state, rather than just the forgiveness of sin. Through faith, moral behavior, and spiritual devotion, followers are encouraged to examine their inner selves, identify the lingering spark of divine light, and nurture it. Similar imagery and symbolism are used to convey the message of restoration. In many religious traditions, the notion that humanity retains traces of its original light within it, a legacy that needs to be preserved and respected, is one that prophets and spiritual leaders have repeatedly emphasized. Prophetic leaders in Judaic traditions led communities towards moral consciousness, ethical integrity, and spiritual practice. They frequently emphasized the connection between humanity's bright beginnings and its current obligations. These lessons support the idea that the light body was never completely extinguished, even though it was lost to the results of disobedience. By restoring a small portion of that lost radiance, each act of self-awareness, justice, and compassion helps to progressively rebuild the link between divine origin and human consciousness. The idea of a future restoration in which all of humanity realigns with the divine intention behind creation is also included in the promise of renewal. Apocalyptic and mystical writings that describe a changed world in which the divine order and the original balance between light and creation are restored contain this vision. Prophets are portrayed as harbingers of this restoration, showing humanity what is possible and teaching them the moral and spiritual roots that will bring them there. Through their leadership, people are reminded that life's journey is not only characterized by hardship and death, but also by the possibility of recovering the radiant essence that is ingrained in their very being. In this context, the symbolism of Adam's lost body of light is a potent metaphor. Humanity's spiritual state reflects a break from direct communion with the divine, just as the first human being changed from a radiant, immortal form to a material body susceptible to hunger, exhaustion, and death. The luminous potential is still an inheritance that needs to be realized via deliberate effort, moral restraint, and spiritual awareness, prophets remind their followers. And this separation is not irreversible. Therefore, the process of restoration is both individual and group-based, and it includes character development, the development of empathy and compassion, and the realization of divine direction in day-to-day living. In particular, the life of Jesus offers a framework for comprehending this restoration in terms of both practicality and symbolism. Jesus is a prime example of how people can restore the spiritual excellence of Adam's original form by leading a life that is in accordance with divine principles, exhibiting unconditional love, and overcoming mortal trials without giving in to fear or selfishness. His resurrection is frequently seen as the final confirmation that humanity's radiant nature, despite being obscured by death, is timeless and able to overcome the constraints placed on it by the fall. Thus, adherents are urged to absorb these lessons, enabling the remembrance of the first Adam's light to motivate moral behavior, spiritual discipline, and the quest for alignment with divine purpose. Prophets have the ability to impact the moral and spiritual development of entire communities in addition to providing individual guidance. Prophets inspire societies to develop justice, equity, and compassion, elements that mirror the light present in humanity's primordial state, by sharing divine knowledge and showing the way to healing. The presence of divine light within social and cultural structures is reinforced through rituals, moral standards, and group observances. By means of these mechanisms, the message of restoration transcends individual experience, influencing the collective consciousness and strengthening the link between divine order and human behavior. At the same time, mystical traditions stress that cultivating inner awareness and spiritual perception is necessary for the restoration of light, which is not just about behavior on the outside. By bringing thought, intention, and action into line with the values that guided humanity prior to the fall, practices like meditation, prayer, and ethical reflection help to awaken the human soul to its latent radiance. This internal journey is similar to the external story of prophetic guidance in that, just as prophets light the way for communities, individuals must do their own spiritual work to recover pieces of Adam's lost light. A dynamic process of restoration is created when individual effort and group guidance come together, fusing the prophet's wisdom with each believer's unique life experiences. Therefore, there are several levels at which the hope of restoration functions. It confirms that humanity is never completely separated from its bright beginning, even in the face of the fall's effects. The message of the prophets is one of guidance and inspiration, emphasizing that moral, spiritual, and ethical endeavors can progressively bring one back into harmony with divine purpose. As the new Adam, Jesus represents the possibility of total restoration, showing that the light that was extinguished in Eden can be found again and made visible via willpower, faith, and dedication. The enduring potential for humanity to overcome the constraints imposed by mortality and recover the brightness of its initial light-filled existence is highlighted by this vision, which transcends all traditions. In the end, the prophetic stories, Jesus' promise as the new Adam, and the idea of salvation as the restoration of Adam's glowing body come together to create a message of hope. Despite its fall, humanity still possesses a glimmer of divinity, a light that endures through the ages. Prophets' teachings remind us that this spark requires acknowledgement, nurturing, and alignment. It is neither dormant nor unattainable. Humans can bridge the divide between the material and the divine, the fallen and the radiant, and the mortal and the eternal, by paying attention to these teachings and taking part in a holy process of restoration. In order to ensure that humanity's luminous potential endures despite the shadows cast by the fall, every act of introspection, moral decision, and spiritual pursuit becomes a chance to honor the lost light and get closer to the original state that the Creator envisioned. Humanity was born of light from the beginning, a glimmer of divine brilliance that lighted up the universe before the darkness of death fell. We are reminded that the essence of human nature is not just flesh and bone, but an enduring connection to the Creator's own light by the story of Adam's first form, a being of radiant energy. Even though our luminous state has fallen and broken over the ages, the traces of that original brilliance have remained within each soul, subtly guiding conscience, stimulating creativity, and fostering hope for recovery. The memory of our luminous origin cries out, urging humanity to seek alignment with higher truths and to recognize the sacred potential that remains unextinguished within us, even in a world dominated by labor, suffering, and uncertainty. This ancient loss is reflected in contemporary struggles such as identity crises, spiritual emptiness, and moral confusion. We struggle with the limitations of our material existence, frequently forgetting the divine spark that resides within, just as Adam and Eve did when they made the journey from light to clay. Nonetheless, moments of compassion, love, and moral bravery bear the remnants of our initial brilliance. The light that was once entirely ours is subtly reclaimed with every act of compassion, every quest for knowledge, and every act of kindness. Prophet's spiritual lessons, Jesus' life as the new Adam, and the mystical traditions found in secret writings all come together to remind us that humanity's bright potential has never been fully lost. It just awaits acknowledgement, development, and embodiment in our day-to-day existence, realizing that the autumn was the start of a journey rather than its conclusion is essential to comprehending our spiritual heritage. The journey of remembrance, a route towards recovering what was once ours by nature, is also humanity's struggle with mortality, both a warning that suffering results from detaching from divine intention and a hope that the original radiance can be restored via moral behavior, spiritual awareness, and deliberate alignment with higher ideals are found in the ancient mystery of Adam's light body. The persistence of human fascination with this luminous origin, which cuts across time, culture, and traditional religious boundaries, is demonstrated by the existence of hidden scriptures, apocryphal writings, and preserved traditions in places like Ethiopia. Like our origin, our destiny is entwined with light. Humanity is to be guided back towards alignment, a return to the state of illumination that reflects the Creator's image by the divine intention ingrained in creation. This return signifies an inner awakening and a deliberate reconnection with the spark that animates us. It is more than just a metaphor. Humans engage in a restorative process through self-examination, moral behavior, and spiritual practice that reflects Jesus' promise. As the new Adam and the prophetic call to righteousness, harmony between human consciousness and the divine presence is gradually restored, as each step towards understanding and decision to act honorably and lovingly reactivates pieces of the light lost in Eden. Significant understanding of the nature of human interconnectedness can also be gained from Adam's first light body's legacy. Humanity carries a collective inheritance of divine brilliance, just as Adam and Eve shared the original radiance. Every person is a part of the cosmic light, and every act of spiritual awareness or moral bravery helps to restore this shared legacy. This perspective reinterprets human struggle as a collective journey towards the rediscovery of a bright potential that unites all people rather than as isolated suffering. Envy, conflict, and suffering are real shadows, but they also define the space where light can shine brightest. Humanity gains the ability to identify, nurture, and safeguard the divine spark within itself and others by overcoming these obstacles. Since we were created of light and will return to it, it is imperative that we embrace our spiritual heritage. Understanding this fact changes the way we live, see, and engage with the world. It inspires us to pursue knowledge that nourishes the soul, act morally, and develop inner-lightening practices. Spiritual development, moral conduct, and acts of compassion are not just ideals. They are the means by which the lost radiance can be found, felt, and made visible in the physical world. The luminous thread that binds humanity to its primordial state is strengthened by each deliberate decision to conform to divine intention. This fundamental truth unites ancient customs, mystical texts, and prophetic messages. Humanity's journey is one of remembering, recovering, and manifesting the eternal light that created us. A blueprint for comprehending our origin, overcoming our current difficulties, and imagining a restored future can be found in the hidden stories of Adam's first form that have been preserved in Ethiopian texts and apocryphal writings. They encourage us to consider the timeless qualities of who we are and to develop an awareness of the light within, despite the distractions, difficulties, and complexity of modern life. We honor our past and our potential by re-establishing a connection with this age-old knowledge, which helps us to bridge the gap between mortality and divine radiance. In the end, the tale of humanity is one of resiliency, remembering, and healing. Although Adam's transition from a light body to a flesh-bound existence brought hardship, suffering, and death, it also created an environment that allowed for the development of spirituality, bravery, and free will. Every ethical choice, every compassionate deed, and every quest for knowledge turns into a mirror of the original light, a means of recovering shards of what was lost. A lens through which to view our contemporary experiences, comprehend the difficulties we confront, and acknowledge the divine potential present in every human being is provided by the ancient mystery of our bright beginnings. We are called to awaken to our spiritual heritage as children of light, to cultivate the inner spark, and to live in accordance with the values that mirror the splendor of our ancestry. This awakening is an active, lived reality that is felt in the decisions we make, the connections we build, and the awareness we uphold of the divine presence both within and outside of ourselves. It is not a far-off, abstract idea. Humanity joins a timeless journey by accepting this understanding, one that connects the past and the future, spiritual aspiration and mortal struggle, and darkness and light. We discover meaning when we re-establish our connection to the lost light. Life's hardships, inner conflicts, and societal challenges take on significance not just as roadblocks, but also as chances for enlightenment, development, and healing. Every act of kindness, love, and moral rectitude deepens the bond with the original light and reaffirms the idea that the divine spark inside of us is eternal, strong, and reachable. Humanity is guided towards the ultimate realization of its luminous potential by the hope of restoration, which is ingrained in the teachings of prophets, the life of Jesus as the new Adam, and the hidden wisdom of ancient scriptures. The human journey is viewed through this lens as one of remembrance, alignment, and renewal, rather than one of loss and suffering. We are called to cultivate the light that endures within us, in addition to acknowledging the darkness that comes with mortality. By doing this, we pay tribute to the ancestry of our species, welcome the prospect of healing, and actively take part in the unfolding narrative of humanity's return to the divine brilliance from which it originated. A truth that shapes identity, purpose, and destiny over time is that we were made of light, and we will return to light.